Welcome to today's episode of Time Well Spent. I'm pleased to welcome our Simcoe County District School Board Principal of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Irfan Toor. Thanks so much for your time today, Irfan, as we explore the concept of racism and the steps that we can all take to move forward in standing up against it and the harm it causes.
Thanks, Daryl. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to you. I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation, but also in my role, I appreciate the fact that I get to foster conversations about equity and inclusion with other people. Just for a little bit of background, I have been in the role now for 3 years. Before that, I was a secondary principal at Twin Lakes in Aurelia, and before that, I was in a role of the vice principal in a couple of schools in Simcoe County, also in Scarborough, and before that, I was a teacher in Toronto, as well as a few other cities as well. So I've appreciated the diversity of experiences I've had that have allowed me to see how different communities and different school cultures also face issues related to equity and racism. I think the first one I would say is learn. We talk about being lifelong learners. We work in an educational system, and I think that as educators, we all have a lot to learn. We have to get beyond the concept that racism is about overt actions taken by people who are not very nice and who we would classify as racists. That's not the kind of racism that we actually have to deal with more often. It's ingrained thinking that's deeply embedded in our subconscious thinking. It's things we've learned over generations and decades. It's assumptions we make about different people, the way we react and respond to different people. For our students, that has an impact on their entire life trajectory. So we have to learn about the history of policy and actions that have unfairly treated groups of people differently because of one aspect of their identity. So I think learning is one. The next one I would think of is challenging yourself, because so much of the anti-racist education work involves self-reflection, and it's a commitment to constantly questioning what you believe to be true. It's not about one solution, it's not about one action, and I think people have to get past the idea of whether just because they don't consider themselves racist, that doesn't mean that they're doing anti-racist work. Let's also clarify that not being racist is a pretty low bar to set, right? So we need to be reaching beyond that. So challenging our own policies and practices that exist in classrooms and schools, questioning whether they impact everybody in the same way, and also getting over the idea that talking about race is uncomfortable. A racialized family doesn't get the choice to not talk about race with their children. So it's if you feel like it's an uncomfortable topic, then a lot of that might be a reflection of the own privilege that you have, because it doesn't affect you the same way. So learning, challenging yourself, and then the third thing I'd probably say is empowering students. Often the adults spend a lot of time worrying about how the conversation's going to go. We hear people talk all the time about the past and these students aren't this or that there's some sort of failing with the current generation. But remember, the current generation is always changing, and when you sit down and listen to them, they're so empowered with knowledge that is relevant to them, right? And sometimes we get stuck on what we believe the knowledge they should have, but frankly, most of that knowledge is stuff they can look up in seconds, in that phone that they're not allowed to have in class. So by empowering our students, take a look at the phrase culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. And what I say to people when we talk about CRRP is the culturally relevant part is not about multiculturalism. It's about being relevant to time and identity. So who are your students now and what matters to them? So one thing I've really respected about the students I've been meeting is their passion for equity, their empathy for others, and their acceptance of different identities. So those would be my three, would be learning for yourself, challenging yourself, and then also empowering your students. I often talk about Deep Diversity, which is a book by Shakil Chaudhry. And one of the reasons I will come back to that book, even though the book is several years old, is that I think what it does is it helps you understand how your subconscious brain, your emotional responses, all the tiny little moments throughout your entire life help frame how you think about something and how you perceive something. And then, of course, that determines how you respond to it. So I think that that's a really useful tool for people to understand how their brain is working. And then after that, then I'd say, then start exploring some of the things that are specifically around anti-racist education. I've been following a podcast called Leading Equity, and it's by Dr. Sheldon Akins. It's US based, but he's an educator, and he interviews people that he hears about who are doing work as what he calls allies in equity. Sometimes they're researchers, sometimes they're school practitioners, a wide range of people. But he brings up topics and engages in conversations much like this. And a few of them that have stood out for me recently were conversations about how kindness and resiliency work that we see so often in schools is not the same as anti-racist work, right? And we sometimes confuse the two. There was another great one that I listened to that was around the use of data and how we can use data to identify how different groups are being affected disproportionately. So a nice range, and you can also get a transcript of it too if you don't want to listen to it. So Leading Equity by Dr. Sheldon Akins. We're living in a time right now where there's been so much public awareness around systemic racism and oppression. And I sit back and think about, racial identities have been used for hundreds of years to dehumanize different people for the purpose of really power and greed and economics. By dehumanizing people based on the color of their skin, we make it okay to do horrible things to them. Stealing their land, stealing them from their land, terrible forms of abuse that was done to them. Well, these all then led to policies and legislation that reinforced it for decades. So knowing our history is really important. Hundreds of years later, we have the lingering effects of all of this mistreatment in our system, our healthcare systems, our policing systems, our education systems. And the last few months really have brought all that to light for a lot of people. So I, of course, have had a lifetime of personal moments related to the color of my skin. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, some of them not everybody would realize are negative. So for many people, we don't really shift our perspective until something affects us personally. And right now, I struggle to see how someone could not be affected personally when you think of what it would take to kneel on a person's neck for almost 9 minutes and think that you're doing your job.
Mm-hmm. Powerful story indeed, Irfan, and thank you for sharing that. I appreciate the opportunity to work alongside you, and I'm thankful for the time, the energy, and the passion that you share readily with our students and staff across the county, and encouraging key opportunities for learning and reflection related to all aspects of equity, diversity, and inclusion. This was indeed time well spent.